All right, let's go Denver Broncos here. Broncos kick things off with Jaden Barron, the cornerback out of Texas. Second round to RJ Harvey, UCF running back. Some Broncos fans didn't love this draft. Sounded like they had some angst around this draft. Like they just missed on players. But Harvey in the second, Walt's own Pat Bryant with the 10th pick of the third round, wide receiver out of Illinois. I think this is where these picks started to feel like reaches relative to the board, and maybe it didn't feel as great for the Broncos. Savion Jones, second, third round pick out of LSU, kind of a hybrid edge, interior pass rush type. One of our favorites, Q Robinson, developmental edge out of Alabama. They go punter in the sixth, Jeremy Crawshaw. And then Caleb Lohner, the tight end out of Utah, former basketball player with very limited football experience. And as people have said, Sean Payton has his next Jimmy Graham as a red zone weapon. Like he's got reps where he's just straight up low posting up in the end zone for touchdowns, JJ Arcega-Whiteside style. So interesting 7th round pick here for Denver. What were your thoughts on the overall haul here for Denver?
Yeah, I quite like this draft. I didn't think it was crazy. They took some interesting players. I think, the where these guys were drafted relative to consensus, I think triggered some people. Pat Bryant in particular is one of the sort of, 15 biggest reaches in this draft, quote unquote, relative to the consensus board, according to Arif Hassan's work. So I think that kind of thing triggered people a little bit. But Mike Silver has an article, I think, at The Athletic, where he was sort of embedded in the Jacksonville war room, during the draft. And they were targeting RJ Harvey. They were targeting Pat Bryant. Like Jacksonville wanted a couple of the players that Denver grabbed. Now, not necessarily exactly where Denver grabbed them, and that's where the reach thing comes in. But I think overall, they've gotten some nice players, and you can just quibble with the value of each one a little bit. But, for whatever a reach Pat Bryant may have been in the third round, I think that's more than offset by getting Jaden Barron at pick 20 in the first round. I think he's a top 10 player in this draft.
Yeah, a lot of the angst, I believe, comes from expectations. There were so many rumors that Denver was trying to trade up, and everybody's like, oh, Sean Payton, he's aggressive. He's going to go get Ashton Genty. Then there's rumors that they were going to be tied to Trevion Henderson, and they're going to take him in the first round, right? Trevion Henderson's going to be a first rounder. He ended up being an early second. So I think Broncos fans really wanted to fill that running back spot because, as we always say, you look up and down the roster, and, like the Colts, they had a glaring need at tight end. So you say, give them a starting tight end, and the value matched up with Tyler Warren. The Broncos don't have any glaring needs. But I'm always the other way. When they get Jaden Barron, I'm just like, I don't care about your needs. This is a great pick, great value at that point. And if he competes with Riley Moss as the starting outside cornerback opposite Pat Surtain, I think you're making your team better. Whoever wins that job. And I think Barron has a great opportunity to do that. And we know how Denver, when they didn't have Riley Moss last year, teams were going away from Surtain. They were getting picked apart. Barron can also play in the slot. Is he better than Jaquan McMillan playing nickel, which is a 70% starting job? I think he is. So he could be the starting outside corner. He could play nickel. I think depth at cornerback is so valuable. If you really wanted him to play safety, he could do that too. Barron can do it all. So I think you just got a very good football player who makes the secondary better. And there's no point where rosters just get overhauled so quickly and you get hit by injuries. You should never say you're set at the four positions you're never set at. O-line, D-line, I don't think wide receiver, and then in the defensive backfield. I know it's like every position group. But you're never set at corner in my mind, and I think this is a great pick by Denver. I do have a soft spot for perceived non-need picks, especially when they draft somebody that I really like in Barron. So I love this first rounder for the Broncos.
Yeah, I look, again, I think Jaden Barron is one of the best value picks in the entire first round. I think he's a top 10 talent in this draft, and he ended up being picked 20 overall. Denver don't desperately need him, but it's not like they can't accommodate him. I'm in number one because I think he could play in any position in that secondary. So obviously Pat Surtain is entrenched there. Whether Jaden Barron is the starter in a two cornerback formation, and then he kicks into the slot when they go to nickel and Riley Moss comes in on the outside, whether he plays the nickel full time, whatever it is, or even mans a safety spot. I know they brought in Talanoa Hufanga, but you could argue Jaden Barron might be a better safety than Hufanga is right out of the gate. So either way, I think they can plug him into the secondary and immediately be significantly better. And I think it's a great pick. The other interesting thing about, the players that Denver got, they were like unconventional selections relative to what other people thought. RJ Harvey, Pat Bryant, etc. But Sean Payton's always been a little bit out there, right? In terms of the players he targets. He doesn't generally go with the conventional wisdom. He's always identified guys that he loves and figured out a way to make it work. Now, sometimes does that get him into a rut where he's like constantly giving little Jordan Humphrey snaps for no good reason years later? Sure. But maybe. I think he's probably built up a bit of credit to say, I had RJ Harvey ranked just below Quinshon Judkins in my running back rankings, right? That guy's got some real talent and juice. He's a sort of unusual player because he's 24 years old. He's, had a lot of college career, redshirted at Virginia, transferred to UCF, then tore an ACL and missed a season, but then had 3 good seasons, right? He's short and stocky, 5'9", 208 pounds, but he's such a dynamo, like explosive, dynamic, difficult to tackle, fast, explosive, ran a 4.4 flat, awesome contact balance, will absolutely annihilate people one-on-one at the second level. Like, I can absolutely imagine a world where you plug him into a good running game and he's instantly like a star running back in the NFL.
Sports Debate Arena does bring up a good question in the chat here, because this is what it comes down to. He says, what do you think of their rankings at positions? Because they go RJ Harvey over a guy like Caleb Johnson. They go Pat Bryant over guys like Jalen Knoll, who obviously we've both raved about. They go Savion Jones over, say, David Walker or Braden Swinson, his teammate at LSU. The Swinson fall, I'm understanding more and more as you get into. He's had some, butted heads with coaches or whatever. He's kind of as a 5th round pick, there's some off field, I guess, there that probably had him drop a little bit. David Walker versus Savion Jones. I would have taken those other players higher, but so that's the part I understand. But I kind of like the other players too, like Harvey, who you mentioned. I really like him as a running back too. My only question is how often he bounces out. Bounces out too much. Got to stay with the play a little bit longer. The Pat Bryant one, especially maybe in relation to a guy like Jalen Knoll, I think is interesting because the Broncos have taken 2 of my favorite receivers over the last couple of years, who I thought are very good vertical threats. And they've had mixed results from them. Marvin Mims 2 years ago, and then Troy Franklin last year.
All right, that's enough of that, Steve. Over 50% of the people listening to this are not subscribed right now. So click that button, and then we can get back to whatever it is Steve's telling you about.
Mims, right. I think, started to really find his footing last year when they started to move him around, put him in the backfield, and even hit him down the field a couple times. Franklin was open deep often last year, and either Bo Nix was missing him or he was dropping the pass. So I still think there's a lot of potential there. So I think if you added Jalen Knoll to this mix, I don't know if he's completely redundant as a 4-3-9 guy where you already have Mims, you already have Franklin, you already have these deep threats. Pat Bryant, I don't know if you heard this comparison that Sean Payton mentioned, though, Sam. He used the name Michael Thomas when talking about Pat Bryant. And Bryant is a 4-6 guy, completely different from these other players. So maybe that's part of the selling point, but he's just a really good receiver, knows how to create position, knows how to get open. Maybe he's the death by 1,000 slants guy like Michael Thomas was, and that's the fit there. So Bryant, I kind of understand as a fit relative to, hey, we already have 2 deep threats. Maybe he's our Michael Thomas, or more realistically, he's more like the Tim Patrick that Broncos fans are more familiar with, who isn't the best athlete in the world, but is a possession receiver type.
Yeah, I mean, I will say with running back in particular, right? Look at this draft. It went as expected at the top. It went Ashton Jeanty 1. Omarion Hampton was the clear 2 in this draft. Then it got, the Ohio State guys were generally seen as in that next group down. RJ Harvey was the 5th running back off the board. And I think once you got to the 5th running back in this draft, everybody's rankings got a bit chaotic, right? Whether it was RJ Harvey, Caleb Johnson, Bashal Tutin, Scadaboo, Dylan Sampson. Like, I think you could have plugged a lot of names into RB5 in an abstract running back rankings this year, and it would have been fine. So I don't think you can look at that and say, like, a lot of people had, including us, had Caleb Johnson ranked above RJ Harvey. But I don't think there's plenty of people that would have had it the other way around. And I think that's fine. So I don't think you can look and say, well, they passed on Caleb Johnson to select Harvey, therefore it's a bad call. Harvey has a good case to be RB5 in this draft, and that's where they took him. So I have no problem with that pick at all. The Bryant one, I think, is a little bit more unusual. Like I would have gone with quite a few wide receivers over Pat Bryant. But again, you're in that world where I think it's defendable. And I do think that Sean Payton has earned, a little bit of credit in the bank to be able to say, well, let's see what he does with these guys first before we absolutely pan the draft pick.
Before we get into the Broncos grades, I want to discuss those two defensive linemen because, as I said about the Bills, as I just said about the Chiefs a little while ago, let's look at the defensive line depth and how the Broncos have built this thing. Already had the most sacks in the league. Last year, they had a breakout season from Nick Bonito. So at edge, you have Bonito and Jonathan Cooper. You have Jonah Ellis. Last year's third rounder, I think still young, developmental type of player. On the interior, Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers, DJ Jones, Malcolm Roach, a couple backups in there. So now you add Q Robinson and Savion Jones. Jones is similar. So now you have Savion Jones, who's kind of a hybrid player, 280 pounds, pretty good athlete for an interior rusher. And you add him to John Franklin Myers and Zach Allen, both guys who, again, they can line up on the edge. They've got some versatility up front. I think Jones is that type. And then Q Robinson, if you want to rave about him for just a minute here, you add him to the mix on the edge. I think they're about 9 or 10 deep on the defensive line. So it was a good draft to do that. In the fact that the Broncos added two players, I don't love Savion Jones, but I get him as a prospect when you're in this rotation where he's got multi-position versatility. And I get Q Robinson because he was uber productive on a limited sample size. I think Denver did really well to maybe fill some other spots at the top and still get defensive line depth in a deep defensive line draft.
Yeah, I think both picks make sense. Q Robinson in particular, I absolutely love as a draft selection. When I was working through tape of all the edge rushers, you get to a group where you're like, I'm just not excited by any of these guys. I see what they bring to the table. It's fine. They can play in the NFL, but I don't know that any of them are going to make a big impact. And then I got to Q Robinson's tape, and I'm like, he's the first guy sort of since the really talented guys at the top of the draft. We are like, oh, we've got something here. Q Robinson's an unusual story because he's on Alabama's defense, but actually he's barely playing on the defense. He's a special teamer. He's got a ton of special team snaps on his resume. He'll obviously carry that through to the NFL as well, and that's a great way of making the roster first and foremost. But if you just watch his pass rushing reps, he's got elite juice. He's got the ability to be an impact situational pass rusher from day one in the NFL. He's got really good speed to the outside. He's bendy. He can sort of win around the corner the way that the best edge rushers in the draft are. He's got a nasty inside counter. He can do that, Von Miller type sweep inside to take advantage of the hard outside set that the offensive tackle is now making to respect his speed. And then he's got a really good bull rush as well. He uses a kind of long arm right up the middle, jams his hand right under the helmet of the offensive tackle and walks that guy back. So that's three ways to win. You can threaten the tackle to the outside, to the inside, and right through the guy. That's instant day one juice in the NFL. You can be a situational pass rusher in addition to being a special team stud from day one as a fourth-round draft pick. I will take that all day long.
So I think at the end of the day, Broncos fans, if RJ Harvey and Pat Bryant are as good as the Broncos, drafted them to be, given their draft position, I think they're happy with this one. I think Barron, again, I think he's going to fit in and improve that secondary. So Broncos come away with, I think, improved depth in the secondary and on the defensive line. Those are both wins. Harvey competes with Audric Estime and Jaleel McLaughlin. I'm still an Estime fan, so I think they've got enough depth there at running back. And Bryant brings a slightly different skill set to this receiving group. We'll see what ends up happening here. Grade-wise, though, yeah, the consensus didn't love it. 24th on Renee's consensus here. Our friend Mike Renner did have a B+. Thor, with the lowest grade for them, a C-. But yeah, 24 on the consensus here for the Denver Broncos.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.